the people in the warehouse are responsible to move the goods once it's at inbound, once it's ready to go to the next, truck, train, distribution center, wherever. So you are responsible only for that part. You don't own all the processes. Now there are softwares which help you track where it came from,
Yeah.
and it's easy to flag if you notice a problem at your location. That it's easy to flag the problem that, hey, there's something happened in the transportation just prior to us or at the location before us. But beyond that, you don't really know what happened.
Growing a business requires a holistic approach that extends beyond sales and marketing. This approach needs alignment among people, processes, and technologies. So if you're a business owner, operations, or finance leader looking to learn growth strategies from your peers and competitors, you're tuned into the right podcast. Welcome to the WBS Podcast, where scalable growth using business systems is our number one priority. Now, here is your host, Sam Gupta.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the WBS Podcast. I'm Sam Gupta, your host and principal consultant at the independent ERP and digital transformation consulting firm Elevate IQ. Many problems like damaged pallets are often regarded as a standard cost of doing business. Without a deep understanding of their underlying causes, these issues can be symptoms of underlying process inefficiencies. However, due to limited visibility, these issues often go unaddressed. Emerging technologies such as digital warehouse twins now offer warehouse operators the ability to empower users without the need for extensive changes across the entire enterprise's processes and data. In today's episode, our guest, Nilay Parikh, discusses how leveraging existing data and processes may lead to faster adoption of technology initiatives. He also discusses several use cases and stories of his digital twin technology and how he saved thousands of dollars for companies by improving operations and quality. Finally, he discusses several issues pertaining to his technology, such as data feeds, privacy, and enterprise architecture. Let me introduce Nilay to you. Nilay Parikh is the founder and CEO at Harvest, a supply chain technology startup based out of Chicago. Nilay has a Master's of Science in Aerospace Engineering from the University of Southern California and has over 7 years of experience in the supply chain industry and close to 5 years in the additive manufacturing space, working with various multinational companies around the world. He started Harvest with the idea of creating a remote operations platform or a digital twin to improve the processes in the warehouse and logistics industries without needing expensive hardware or infrastructure changes. They have been through the world-renowned Techstars Accelerator and are just coming out of an oversubscribed first round of raise. With that, let's get to the conversation. Hello, hey Nilay. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Sam. Great to be here.
Yeah, and I'm super excited to have you. Anybody that comes from supply chain, it's always a pleasure because of the kind of stories that you're going to have. It's always fascinating. Just to kick things off, if my listeners might not know you, do you want to start with your quick intro as well as what you're focusing on these days?
For sure, yeah. So once again, Nilay Parikh here. I'm the founder and CEO at Harvest. We are an early stage supply chain tech startup based out of Chicago, Illinois. We are focused on building real-time digital twins for warehousing and logistics operation using existing infrastructure.
Okay, yeah. So very good. So obviously, I would love to learn more about that. We have hosted some of the guests before that are doing very similar things. I don't know if they are going to be competitors. So we'd love to talk about how their offerings differ, I guess. So before we do that, we have one of these standard questions that we ask every single guest. And that is going to be your perspective on business growth.
Well, so my perspective on business growth stems from two different experiences, right? One of them is, of course, my professional experience where I've been in the supply chain industry as an executive for almost 7 years, working in different roles, and then, of course, as a startup. And both of those perspectives are very different, right? For a startup, the growth is around getting the validation around the technology that we are building, the problems that we are solving for our customers, and how they're seeing the value. When it comes to just business growth in general, in terms of corporate environments, it's more about the success, right? You have your standard metrics that you're trying to hit, the grow, especially given different economic conditions. So there's two different variations to that answer.
Okay, so very interesting. So now let's go back to our discussion about, I guess, the digital twin for supply chain. So describe that a little bit. People might not know, and maybe touch with an example or a case study that you might be able to discuss where the pain point is coming from, what kind of businesses are going to benefit from something like this.
For sure, yeah. So let's start from the basics, right? In terms of digital twin technology, it's sort of a misnomer, if you will. Everyone has their own definitions these days around what digital twin implies, right? Microsoft Azure has their own digital twin definition. GE has their definition of digital twin. But sometimes when we say we are digital twin for warehousing, people think it's more of a metaverse that we're trying to create, right, for logistics. But that's not the case. In the most simplest terms, right, digital twin essentially means replicating or simulating an environment, condition, process, or a product.
Yeah.
In this case, we are trying to replicate a process, that's specifically the operational process in the warehouses. And before going into the case studies, right, just to give a little bit of an idea and context on why we emphasize existing infrastructure.
Yeah.
Stemming from our supply chain background and our experience.
Yeah.
One of the biggest reasons, if you will, these digital or digitization or industry 4.0 projects fail is because of the need for new infrastructure or changing of infrastructure or new hardware processes or new implementations.
Yeah.
Right. As soon as you get those, process changes involved, it becomes a way more complicated project. It of course becomes a capital intensive project.
Right.
But then we also need to remember that in a lot of cases we're dealing with blue collar and temporary workforces over here, and which requires a lot of training. It again becomes a bottleneck for implementing these solutions. So while all of them work really great in your excellence centers or your labs and test environments, it doesn't translate very well. So that was the focus with which we started developing, and that's what really differentiates us, is where we are trying to leverage existing data and existing infrastructure already built in place. So I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
We take in the video data from their security cameras.
Yeah.
We bring that into the Arvis platform. Then we bring the data from their existing ERP or WMS systems.
Yeah.
And we have unique markers which we stick on, think about like QR code stickers, on assets which belong to the facility. The combination of these three essentially asset-light ways of getting data is what allows us to create this digital twin environment and replicate the operations, give insights around how the operations are performing and what can we do to improve them. Does that make sense?
It does a little bit, maybe, and I want to make sure that my listeners are able to follow along. So I definitely want you to break down a little bit more. So let's say, and I don't know who is going to benefit from digital twin. So let's say if I'm the CFO of the organization, maybe I'm CEO, and I'm trying to figure out, where I can improve. Obviously, you have suggested that, you are looking at existing data, existing processes. Right. In most cases, they are probably going to be broken. We all know this. So now we have the broken processes, and we are probably trying to study that, I guess, based on the data sets that you have. So overall, let's say if I'm the warehouse worker and I'm simply trying to move my boxes, or I'm manager, I'm probably trying to manage my crew. So who is going to be benefited? Who is looking at the digital twin, and what is going to be their day in the life scenario? Let's say, describe what is their day in the life scenario without it, and what is going to be their day in the life scenario with it.
Absolutely, yeah. So that's a great question, and you broke down with three different personas, right? CFO, the warehouse worker, and the operations manager.
Yeah.
Operations manager is the person who is our target user of the product.
Okay.
Right? So they are the ones who will be able to manage their warehousing operations, and I'll go into details over there. And CFOs or executive COOs would be the people who would be the buyers for our platform, right? Because they are, in the end, they are seeing the benefits of an efficient warehouse in the end affects the bottom line. Right. So how the operations manager benefits from our solution. Let's go into some examples. Let's talk about yard management as one case study, right? So one of the biggest problems in the yards currently is when trucks come in, they have sort of a timer which starts, right? There's limit in which they have to load and unload the goods. If they don't do that, it incurs a fine or a fee. That's called detention charges in the warehousing world.
Yeah.
So when a truck comes in with an Arvis platform in place, we would give them, we could recognize which trucks are coming in through their license plate recognition, the trailers, how long were they in the truck or were they in the yards for, and when did it actually reach the loading dock, right? It was not just parked in the yard.
Yeah.
That's when the timer starts. And, warehouse these days, if you've seen them, they're massive, right? So you're talking about 50, 100 loading docks at the same time. So what we can give is insights to the manager. Hey, loading dock 4 and loading dock 15 are at detention time limits, and you might want to unload or load them up first so that they are good to go. And instead of immediately unloading the loading dock 75, which the truck just arrived. Right, that kind of an insight immediately helps them, rearrange or remanage the resources in their facilities, and also, again, get understanding of how long it usually takes to load and unload. And again, it helps in planning for future purposes as well. Right. So how it would be done traditionally is first it would be either a person walking around the loading dock. It could be with a yard management software. They would also require manual input, right? Or it could be a yard jockey, which is going back and forth, identifying which loading docks are open, which trucks came in. And it's human nature to make mistakes especially when you have thousands of trucks coming in and out during the day. So that's just one example. Wanted to share you how operations manager can benefit, right? If we continue to dive into the warehousing operations, let's say the trucks came in, the goods were unloaded, right? And I'll give you an example from our actual customer right now. Is when the pallets are unloaded from the truck, they did not do quality checks, and that was simple reason was they don't have people, right? So they would have pallets coming in, they would store it in their warehouse, and then when it's time to ship it out to the next point in the supply chain, they would take it out. Sometimes they would do a quality check at that point, but they are a distribution center. They are not responsible for the quality as such, right? But if something is broken over there, the vendor right before them is not going to take responsibility if you did not inform them right at the point of entry. Right. So what was happening was every month they would find between 2 to 3 pallets which were damaged. That could have just been damaged during transportation, tilted, broken, and whatnot. And they just assume that as cost of operation, right? So now each pallet approximately $8,000 to $10,000. So $30,000 was just an operating cost for them, cost of doing business, right, in the warehousing space. With our system, what we did was we would do a quick quality check as soon as the pallet was unloaded with a forklift, right? And we would give them a thumbs up, thumbs down. If something looked off, then we would just inform an operator, hey, take a look at it, right? We were not going to the product level to do a check, but at least at a pallet level, if something looks off, do a check. That was a good example to show about $300,000 to $350,000 of saving in just one warehouse by using existing infrastructure and no additional risk to the customer to try out AI technology, which also goes to say, right, like people think about artificial intelligence, computer vision as enterprise level, massive deployments. There's very easy ways to get started and actually implement it for useful use cases as well.
So very interesting use case there. So we are definitely going to peel some more layers here, I guess, and we are probably going to be peeling a lot, just to understand what's going on there, right? We all need to fix problems, and seems like you do have very good solution that can really help people, I guess, right? So overall, in this particular scenario, one of the problems that you highlighted was that people were not really interested in performing the quality, and which is typically the problem. People are really not interested in doing that unless you have some sort of financial motivation for them, otherwise they're not going to care. People care for things that they care for. So either it is going to be compensation or some sort of driver that is really driving them. So in this particular case, people were the problem, but you mentioned that, all of a sudden you are bringing the technology and it's working fine. So if people were the problem, how come technology is able to solve the problem? Because if people were the problem, regardless of the technology, old new, the problem is still going to be the same. Some people are going to follow it. Some people are not going to follow it. Then you are not going to get the data, right? If you don't have enough data, then I don't know, any model is probably not going to be good to be able to analyze, I guess. So tell us a little bit more. How come you are able to solve the people side of issues?
Sure. Yeah. And that's a great way to put it, right? So people are not really the problem. The incentive for the people is the problem, right?
Exactly.
So the warehouse workers in most cases are incentivized by how many goods they're moving,
Right.
right? What's the throughput, right? So how many pallets did they move during the day? Now, if our system is flagging that there is something wrong with the pallet, and even after that flag, if no one's taking care of that, then that's a problem, right? That the manager can go in and address. Because right now, without having visibility of where they were not stopping, it it means the workers were doing their job, right? It was not like they were not. And even when they were moving the pallets before our system was implemented, it was not like they did not want to check for quality. It was just that their incentive was to get pallets. That was their job, right? They were tasked to unload the truck as fast as possible, put the loads in the warehouse. Now, with the system installed, they have been told that if the system flags, then you need to do a quality check and update the WMS immediately. Right? This makes that job description itself was changed, right? To ensure. So it requires a bit of change management perspective as well, because managers are also like, hey, we saw this things were coming in which were not good,
Yeah.
and you still allowed it to go in, right? So now it becomes someone's responsibility to ensure that the quality check is done.
So is it fair to say, let's say in this particular case, obviously the technology was the enabler from the process perspective, but then the
Right.
process need to be changed as well, right? I mean,
Mhm.
and the people had to comply with that. Maybe technology enabled them to comply. That could be the case, but I mean, process and people, they are going to be equally important, I guess. Is it fair assessment here in this particular situation?
100%, and that is the case in every kind of technology implementation, right?
Right.
Technology is always going to be the enabler.
Yeah.
We often think of technology, especially the AI technology, as
Yeah.
sort of a replacement. It is not the case, right? It is always going to be there to help, and it requires certain amount of change management training on the managers and employees part as well.
Okay, so very interesting. So one of the comments that you had mentioned in the beginning is the
Mhm.
hardware space. I guess you were talking
Correct.
about the failure rate of the Industry 4.0 projects, right?
Yeah.
So, and you had mentioned that, you know what, if you try to change the processes, which are
Hmm.
the problems in general,
Right. For sure.
they are really broken, to be completely honest, because,
Hmm.
people don't know how to streamline that. Sometimes they just don't see it because they have
Hmm.
never seen it. So it's
Yeah.
very hard for them to be able to recognize that the problem exists in processes and data. And that's what makes change management so hard, right?
Hmm.
Now, there is a saying in the technology world, right? If you are going to implement a technology, I mean, that is only going to give you the better results faster, right? So in
Yeah.
this particular case, so you are saying, don't change the processes, don't change the
Hmm.
data, implement technology, which is wonderful. Okay.
Yeah.
If technology solves the problem, obviously that should be the right decision. But in
Hmm.
general, you have to solve the root cause. Otherwise, you can implement the software, but you are
Right.
not going to get the real results, the real adoption, the real value, the business value,
Mhm.
the financial value from the implementation. I don't know, Amici, do you have any comment there based on your experience, I guess, or if you have any other stories
Mhm.
that you might be able to share based on this?
Yeah, so I agree and disagree at the same point.
Yeah, I love
In
it.
Yeah, so continuing with this use case, right, around the quality control issue,
Yep.
there is no way for that manager or the employees to actually go to the root cause and solve it, because
Yeah.
they are just one cog in this big wheel,
Yep.
right? Like in the supply chain, there's so many different players. If you start doing like an investigation, you would end up offshore in some country where the actual product was made.
Yeah.
From there on, if you did have like actual physical visibility on the
Yeah.
product,
Yeah.
only then you would be able to trace where did it break in the supply chain, right?
Right.
So over here, the problem is not that you can't solve at a root cause level. It's just beyond scope for these people, right? At least they can bring it to the visibility, and they can stop it at their chain, right? So that's what we're trying to say. In this case, mostly in supply chain, that becomes since you are in this industry, you get it very well that a lot of these operate in silos. And so to find out a problem or do a root cause investigation, you always have to go like 2, 3 points back in the chain. So that becomes a difficult issue. If you're talking about manufacturing in particular, then it's a different case, right?
Right.
Then you can go down to the root cause analysis and actually find out where things went wrong in your particular production environment.
Okay, so very interesting. So maybe touch a little bit, why is it so different in manufacturing, and you are talking about the distribution environment, I guess, right? In that it
Right.
is not very different. So talk to us a little bit more about that. Why is that?
Right. So when you're talking about manufacturing, right, like once you have the raw materials coming in into your facility
Yeah,
and your output is a particular product, for
yeah,
example, right?
yeah,
In between, you are in control of all your processes. Essentially, you do from the checking of the raw materials to the output of the product
yeah,
and till it's packaged in some
yeah,
cases. Your company, your facility, your people are responsible. In case of warehousing and distribution, you could just be like one point
yeah,
in a 10-point cycle, right? So the product could arrive at a port. Let's not even go into manufacturing. After the product was manufactured and shipped out, they reached the port of Savannah, for example. After that, there's the first point of entry where they're just unloading the big cargo boxes, right? And they're putting it into pallets. That distribution center sends it to the other warehouse, which is in near Atlanta. The next one takes it on a train to Chicago. It's again unloaded into a warehouse. So at any point, the people in the warehouse are responsible to move the goods once it's at inbound, once it's ready to go to the next, truck, train, distribution center, wherever. So you are responsible only for that part. You don't own all the processes. Now there are softwares which help you track where it came from,
yeah.
and it's easy to flag if you notice a problem at your location. That it's easy to flag the problem that hey, there's something happened in the transportation just prior to us or at the location before us. But beyond that, you don't really know what happened.
Okay, very interesting. So let's go back to this, story a little bit. And I don't know, Missy, I don't think you have mentioned the size, I guess, of the business. How big the
Mhm.
business was. That generally sets up the context. And sometimes, I mean,
Mhm.
the small businesses, they are going to have very different problems than the larger businesses, right?
Absolutely right.
So let's say, and maybe talk a little bit about, the size as well,
Mhm.
as well as the whole architecture, I guess. That's what I would be interested in knowing. So, for example, let's say this component, and there are
Yeah.
many different solutions, and I don't know whether you have heard of the 3D warehouses, as part of the ERP
Mhm.
system. Some WMS components, they have 3D
Right.
warehouses as well. I don't know
Yeah.
whether you like to call yourself slightly different or is it the same.
Yeah.
Obviously setting them up is going to be much more difficult in general because you would
Mhm.
require the modeling the whole warehouse. But seems like,
Mhm.
based on the way you described, it doesn't seem like that you are modeling the same way
Correct.
as they
We're
would
not.
model, and that's why yours is going to be slightly easier, but
Mhm.
then they are going to be tightly sort of affiliated with the operations, I
Mhm.
guess. I don't know if affiliation is the right word there, but they are sort of tight wired, I guess, with the architecture, with the operational transactions. So
Mhm.
talk about a little bit, on the architectural piece in this particular case. How big was the business? Many different systems that did they have, and where your component sort of, was a fit?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the business was a medium-sized business, about 18 locations, I believe, that they have for warehousing.
Okay.
Each one between 75 to 150,000 square feet. A couple of them are bigger. So revenue-wise, 30 to 50 million dollars revenue range. So it was
Yeah.
definitely a medium-sized company in the supply chain world. And they're the standard culprits. You have the WMS systems over there. They have normal access control,
Yeah.
security camera systems, and they had like a lightweight version of yard management solution that
Yeah.
they had in place. But other than that, there was no other technology, and not in terms of like conveyor belts or robotics or autonomous forklifts or as such.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of business that we are talking about, and we work with mostly medium-sized to large-scale enterprises
Yeah.
simply because it's easier to show the ROI when you have a little bigger operations, and
Yeah.
it's easy to affect the bottom line immediately.
Yeah.
So that's essentially the kind of system that we are talking about. In terms of architecture, right? Like we are not building a 3D warehouse, not at all. And I mean, I've seen a few of them. They look cool, but I don't see the need or point of that unless you are building an augmented reality application where you're
Yeah.
walking around and seeing the warehouse. We're trying to focus more on allowing them to control operations in three major areas. One is quality. We talked about that,
Yeah.
productivity or throughput,
Yeah.
and safety. Right. So safety and risk mitigation is the third one.
Yeah.
And so we allow or we model only the processes which require attention in these cases. So it could be packing stations where we are calculating the throughput
Yeah.
of the products or packages moving through. Safety in terms of like ergonomics of employees at particular stations, chances of them getting back injuries, for example,
Yeah.
or identifying hazardous zones in particular warehouse so you can identify where the chances of accidents are the highest. So we are only identifying and modeling those areas. This makes the product way more lighter. It doesn't require big servers being put up in warehouses. Infrastructure is always hard, right? So we're trying to make sure we can deploy it on cloud. Even if you're doing it on edge for security reasons, it's lightweight. It can be run on your normal CPU. So that's really what differentiates us in terms of digital twin, if you will.
Yeah, so that's very interesting. So one of the interesting observations that I'm having there is the security feed, right? I mean, that is something that we have not seen in any of the operational systems. So what is the role of that security feed? What is it doing? Are you trying to monitor people, whether they are complying with the quality control so that you can detect? What exactly is the role of that security feed, and how is that being utilized in the process?
Right. So security feed in the most easy way to explain is the eyes for
Right.
Arvest, right?
Yeah.
That's what allows us to see. The
Yeah.
WMS ERP data can give us information on where goods are moving, where they're supposed to be moving. But with that combination of markers and the security cameras is what allows us to actually see the ground reality.
Yeah.
Things like ergonomics I mentioned, right? We are able to give ergonomic assessment of how people are lifting things, how are they moving things, without the need for wearables or exoskeletons or any of those sorts. The way that we identify near misses or close calls between forklifts and racks and aisles, or forklifts and humans, for example, identifying hazardous zones is done through camera systems. The throughput calculation, you could do it through your scanning of your WMS every time you scan and you move the goods. Sometimes how it works at a few packing stations, especially when it comes to kitting operations, is you would have someone who would scan it and they would put that box right beside them, right? And then once the trolley is filled up, then they would send it to the next station. So this doesn't give them a real throughput of how many packages are being done in an hour. It's just giving the throughput of that particular area. So with cameras, we can actually gain that kind of insight as well. So the combination of video and this ERP WMS systems is what makes it really different. But what's also interesting is security camera feeds, right? It's one infrastructure which is widely available. It's omnipresent, if you will, especially in the warehousing world. And that's one of the reasons for starting over here. Now there's few reasons. One of them, it's driven by their customers, right? So if I am selling an expensive product and there's a distribution center, I'll sign a contract with them only if they have 100% security camera coverage. And I'm not asking them to sit and look at it, but at least it's a peace of mind, right? If something goes wrong, if there's a theft, if there's a big fire in that facility, I can go back and look at the camera feeds and see what actually happened, right? It's more of an insurance, if you will. And that's the real advantage for us to give our customers an ROI. They have invested in the security camera infrastructure. Why not give them some more advantage using that?
So that's very interesting. So in your experience, how have people reacted? And I don't even know if they know that the security camera is being used to know. And I mean, one of the resistance that anybody's going to get with this is, you are being watched, and people don't like to be watched, right? So so in your experience, I mean, when, let's say, if anybody is trying to utilize this system, somebody is going to say this, so in your experience, how do you feel? How do people feel about something like this in their warehouse? When they're being watched. I know that you are probably going to say that this is going to be from the productivity perspective, but still, I think people are going to have those feelings, right? So
absolutely, and it's legitimate concern, and we have taken steps to mitigate that. But first counterpoint to that is, hey, that problem or issue should be raised when they were installing security cameras, right? We are not going in and installing new cameras. It's already there. They're already being monitored, if you will. It's been put in place from a security perspective anyway. Right. So we are just utilizing that and running analytics on top of it. We are giving more feed or more intelligence to those cameras, if you will. And second point, if you will, is completely understand privacy concerns, right? And we work with facilities which have union-based employees as well, where another like data privacy becomes a concern. For us, we take that very seriously. One thing that we do is we blur out all faces before we do any kind of artificial intelligence analytics, regardless of the fact if someone's comfortable with cameras already or there or not. It's like a blanket statement. We don't really budge on that. It's part of our feature set that we blur out all faces. So there's no recognition that, hey, this is Nilay or this is Sam and they are doing something wrong. It's more of a behavioral change that we are bringing. The manager would know that this area is where the problem occurred, not who actually was responsible. We are not in the business of a Big Brother-esque software at all, right? That's not the point. The point is to improve productivity, like you said.
Yeah.
So that's number one. And the second one is, of course, security measures in terms of data, right? How and where we are storing data. We are employing technologies like federated learning, which allows us to anonymize complete data collection process and only helps us to improve our ML models without actually taking that data offsite, storing it anywhere. So definitely taking a lot of steps in terms of employee privacy and keeping that in check.
So that's a very interesting argument, right? So let's say if somebody is trying to install security camera right here to watch me, I'm probably going to have problems with that. Okay, nobody is installing here. Now, to your comment, I mean that's a very interesting comment, right? So, for example, you said that you have security camera here, I may not have any problems, and I have been to facilities where I did not have any problems with the security camera. And if I think about it, the only reason why I did not have any problems with those security cameras is because I know for a fact that nobody is watching me. They are watching the problems, not me. Okay. As soon as I know that they are watching me, I have problem with the security camera. So, I don't know. If you see that, I guess, some people are going to say that, I guess.
And that's where, our point around, it's not just that security cameras, some could be comfortable, some are not. If you're walking into an airport, you're not going to complain that there's security cameras, right? They are there everywhere.
Exactly.
They're in your shopping malls, hotels.
We know what we are getting into there.
Correct. Yeah.
We don't have a choice.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's the case, right? Even in warehouses, there's a lot of things which are going wrong, especially in terms of accidents, security issues, even active shooters and things like that. So they have to put cameras over there from a security perspective.
Yeah.
And it becomes part of our job also to train and tell people how the technology works, right? We have had cases where we have done a session with the union leaders from a particular facility to show them on the back end, right? Like how the technology works, how the facial recognition does not exist at all, right? So it becomes part of an educating factor as well, because there's a lot of fear. Right? There's hype, but there's also a lot of fear around AI, right? And what all it can do.
Yeah.
So we want to make sure that they are clear, right? Hey, that's what you see on LinkedIn. It's not what you're getting over here into. So.
Yeah. So great discussion. Enjoyed it completely. So I think the time flies. And I don't know if you're going to have any sort of closing advice for our listeners.
Closing advice for listeners is I think it was lost in the state during our conversation, but the fact that there are ways to get started with newer technology. It doesn't always require massive budgets or big time planning, 3 years of planning. It's always good to get started. What in our experience has been that once you start off with a small area, subsection of the technology, it gets the wheels, churning in the brains of a lot of people, especially on the warehouse floor. Like, hey, this is cool use of technology. Can we use it to solve this problem as well? And that, actually generates a lot of creative ideas from within the company. So instead of just having a separate think tank group somewhere far off in the corporate office, getting technology on the ground and started is a great way to get a lot of people involved and excited.
Okay, amazing. And my personal takeaway from this conversation is going to be whatever problems you are facing, open your eyes and just look around, what options may be available. On that note, I really want to thank you for your time. This has been a fascinating episode.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Sam, for having me.
Of course. I cannot thank our guests enough for coming on the show, for sharing their knowledge and journey. I always pick up learnings from our guests, and hopefully you learned something new today. If you'd like to learn more about Nilay or his startup, head over to arvest.ai. It's ARVIST.ai. You can also reach him at nilay@arvest.ai. It's NILAY@ARVIST.ai directly to learn more about their supply chain platform and the vision for the product. Links and more information will also be available in the show notes. Also, don't forget to subscribe and spread the word among folks with similar backgrounds. If you have any questions or comments about the show, please review and rate us on your favorite podcasting platform or DM me on any social channels. I'll try my best to respond personally and make sure you get help. Thank you, and I hope to get you on the next episode of the WBS Podcast.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the WBS Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform so you never miss an episode. For more information on growth strategies for SMBs using ERP and digital transformation, check out our community at WBS.rocks. We'll see you next time.